The air in the makeshift wardrobe trailer, usually thick with the scent of mothballs and expensive wool, was suddenly scorching, smelling only of panic and stale coffee. "Don't move, Elara. Don't even breathe too hard," boomed the voice of Mr. Davis, the head of security, his large frame blocking the narrow exit. His expression was a mask of grim corporate finality. Elara Vance stood frozen, her hands held out awkwardly in a posture of mock surrender that felt sickeningly real. She was wearing the tattered remains of her costume from the scene they had just wrapped, a drab 1940s housewife dress that clung sweatily to her skin. Across the small, mirrored space, the object of this sudden, violent intrusion lay draped over a rolling rack, the Empress coat. It wasn't just a coat. It was the centerpiece of the entire third act of Crimson Requiem, a film budgeted at $150 million, starring the untouchable Seraphina Vale, made of midnight blue Italian velvet, lined with pure silk, and trimmed with rare Siberian sable. Its insurance appraisal alone exceeded the budget of Elara's entire 3-picture contract. "I didn't take it, Mr. Davis," Elara whispered, the words catching in her throat. Her eyes darted to the other occupant of the trailer, a harried assistant named Chloe, who was frantically rifling through a pile of discarded scarves, her face pale with terror. "We both know that's not what the production ledger says, Miss Vance," Davis stated, his voice devoid of inflection. He gestured toward the coat rack with a heavy hand. "The coat was signed out of secure storage at 4 p.m. yesterday by you, for your standby fitting for scene 112. It was returned to the set vault at 7 p.m. The vault log shows it was opened at 7:05 p.m., and by 7:15 p.m., it was gone. And you were the only non-executive personnel signed in and out of that specific location during that crucial 15-minute window." Elara felt the blood drain from her face. A 15-minute window. It sounded airtight, a perfectly constructed lock. "That's impossible. I was in makeup until 6:45. Then I went to wardrobe to try on the day dress. I never went near the vault. Seraphina was in there. She often does last-minute adjustments on her own props." Davis scoffed, a dry, unpleasant sound. Ms. Vale was using the main star dressing room, 3 trailers down. Her assistant confirmed she never left her presence between 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. "Your call sheet, Elara, confirms you were the last person signed to handle the Empress coat for your proposed stunt double fitting." The lie hit Elara with the force of a physical blow. She had been near the vault area, but only briefly, to pick up a prop cigarette holder she needed for a close-up scheduled for the following day. She hadn't touched the coat. "They swapped the tags," Elara insisted, her voice gaining a desperate edge. "Someone planted this here to frame me. I'm a supporting actress, Mr. Davis. Why would I risk everything for a coat I'm not even wearing?" Davis's eyes narrowed, reflecting the harsh fluorescent light of the trailer. "That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Maybe you're trying to sell it. Maybe you want to leverage it. Ms. Vale is not known for being forgiving of perceived slights, Elara. Or perhaps—" He leaned in conspiratorially, lowering his voice just enough to make it sound intimate and damning. "You were hoping to pawn it off as a similar high-end piece, hoping nobody would notice the slight difference in the embroidery patterns until it was too late. Perceived slights." Elara's mind flashed back 6 months to the initial table read. She had accidentally referenced an old Oscar speech by Seraphina Vale, mistaking the year. Seraphina had smiled, a glacier-cold gesture, and replied, "Darling, my achievements are timeless. Try to keep up." The rivalry wasn't born of competition. It was born of Seraphina's sheer need for undisputed dominion. Elara, with her solid reviews and quiet work ethic, was a small, persistent shadow Seraphina couldn't quite erase from the periphery of the spotlight. "I swear, I didn't steal it," Elara pleaded, looking desperately at Chloe, who quickly looked away, fiddling with a rogue thread on a silk shawl. "The studio is done investigating, Miss Vance," Davis concluded, pulling out a sealed envelope. "You are suspended indefinitely, effective immediately. Your trailer must be cleared by sundown. Any attempt to leave the lot without clearance will be treated as fleeing jurisdiction. We have your passport on file." The world tilted.
Suspension.
Blacklisted. In Hollywood, suspension was often just a slow, agonizing death sentence, far worse than immediate firing. The whispers would start immediately: troublemaker, unreliable, dishonest. As Davis turned to guard the door, Elara's gaze fixed on the coat again. It was stunning, a piece of wearable art. She knew its make. She had studied it for continuity reference, noting the intricate, hand-stitched lapel detail. A tiny, almost invisible silver thread woven into the sable seam near the collar. If I didn't touch it, how did it end up back in the vault? The log said it returned at 7 p.m. If someone stole it after 7 p.m., who handled it between the return and the discovery of the loss at 7:30 p.m.? Only the head costumer, Lena Rodriguez, had access during that period for final checks before wrapping the evening crew. But Lena was kind. She was meticulous. She wouldn't frame anyone. Elara forced herself to breathe, pulling the cold logic of her craft over the rising tide of hysteria. A frame job required planning, access, and motive. Seraphina had the motive, crushing a perceived rival, and the access. The entire studio apparatus was bent to her will. "Mr. Davis," Elara said, her voice low but steady, surprising even herself. "If I stole this, why wouldn't I take it with me? Why leave it here, perfectly displayed, waiting for me to be searched?" Davis hesitated for a fraction of a second. "That's called hubris, Miss Vance. Or perhaps you got scared when you heard the alarm system was triggered due to a minor power fluctuation at 7:18 p.m. Security was dispatched immediately. You realized you couldn't walk out with a $200,000 coat on your person, so you hid it in the only place you thought wouldn't be searched until you could retrieve it later, your own fitting rack." It was plausible, terribly plausible, and that was the horror of it. When Davis finally stepped aside, Elara didn't run. She walked slowly to the coat rack. She let her fingers hover inches above the cold, rich velvet. She needed one small piece of tangible proof that this wasn't just a fantasy of a paranoid mind. She leaned in close, her breath misting the delicate sable fur around the collar, searching for that silver thread. It wasn't there. The silver thread, the specific hallmark she had memorized, was missing. Instead, near the left lapel, there was a slight, almost imperceptible puckering in the velvet. A hasty, professional repair job covering where a thread had been pulled out or cut. The coat they were accusing her of stealing wasn't the coat she had seen yesterday. It was a near-perfect forgery, hastily switched and then planted back, with the evidence of the switch subtly erased. Someone had replaced the authentic Empress coat with a replica, hidden the original, and then, perhaps realizing the replica wouldn't pass the long-term scrutiny, swapped it back for the real one, framing Elara in the process of the final switch. The window wasn't 7:05 to 7:15 p.m. The window was the entire week leading up to this moment. Elara looked at her reflection in the mirror. A pale, frightened woman staring out from behind the eyes of a seasoned survivor. She was cornered, stripped of her professional standing, but the cold realization of the meticulous planning only hardened her resolve. Seraphina Vale hadn't just wanted her gone. She had wanted her publicly executed. Elara Vance would not die quietly in the shadow of the Empress coat. The next 72 hours were a blur of sanitized humiliation. Elara was escorted off the Paramount lot by a studio liaison who treated her as if she were carrying highly contagious waste. Her personal effects were packed into sterile white plastic bins. The keys to her leased luxury apartment, provided through the production company, were quietly revoked. She was given a severance check, a pittance compared to her expected earnings, and a non-disclosure agreement so aggressively worded it felt like a muzzle forged in platinum. She ended up in a cheap, forgotten motel off the Ventura Freeway, the kind of place where the neon sign flickered the O in motel with agonizing regularity. The silence was the worst part. On set, there was always noise. The clamor of the grips, the director's shout, the constant buzz of ambition. Here, there was only the sound of the highway and the buzzing of her disconnected phone. Her agent, Marcus, hadn't returned her calls. He had sent a terse email. "Elara, this is catastrophic. I'm looking into legal options, but you must understand the power structure here." Seraphina Vale is the golden goose. You are a very expensive goose feather that fell off the pond. I suggest you keep your head down. Keeping her head down meant accepting the narrative. Elara Vance, the struggling supporting player, succumbed to desperation and tried to steal a prop worth more than her entire net worth. The insurance claim would be settled quickly, the movie would move on, and Elara would become a cautionary tale whispered in the casting rooms. She sat on the edge of the thin mattress, staring at the single item she had managed to keep. A small, battered, leather-bound notebook filled with character notes and observational sketches from the last 3 productions. It was her anchor to the work she loved, untainted by the glamour or the politics. She needed to prove the switch. To do that, she needed to know where the real Empress coat went after it was taken from the vault between 7 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. If the coat was stolen and replaced by a fake within that window, and then the real one was used for the frame, someone had to move the real one temporarily. Elara knew that valuable, unique props like the Empress coat weren't just locked in a generic safe. They were kept in a specialized costume vault, managed primarily by Lina Rodriguez, the chief costume designer, and Seraphina's dedicated dresser, Marco. She had to talk to Lina. Lina Rodriguez was an artist, a woman who understood fabric like a surgeon understands anatomy. She had always been kind to Elara, often staying late to tweak Elara's fittings, treating her with respect that Seraphina never afforded anyone outside her inner circle. It took Elara 2 days of careful planning to make contact. She couldn't use her agent or her lawyer. Everyone was monitoring her communication channels. She used a burner phone and called Lina's private line, a number she'd memorized from a shared emergency contact sheet. "Hello." Lina's voice was tight, wary. "Lina, it's Elara. Please, you have to listen to me. Don't hang up." There was a pause, long enough for Elara's heart to hammer against her ribs. "Elara, I can't talk about this. They warned us. Everyone who interacts with you now is under review. I know they are, Lina, and that's why you have to help me. I didn't take the coat. I know you were the last one near the vault after it was returned. The coat that was found in my trailer, it's a fake. I saw the missing stitch. The real one was swapped out, and I was set up to take the fall for the swap, not the theft." Silence again. This time it sounded heavier, laced with fear. Why would anyone do that? Lina finally managed, her voice barely a breath. "Why steal it just to put it back? To make me look like a desperate thief who got caught. Seraphina hates that I'm good enough to hold the audience's attention, even when I'm only on screen for 4 minutes an episode. She needs me gone, Lina. And she needed the theft to look like a clumsy attempt that was foiled. The coat, the real one, I remember when it came in. It was insured for $210,000. It has a specific lining tag, a tiny, almost invisible signature from the Italian artisan Verratti." Lina's voice cracked slightly. "When I did the final inventory check at 7 p.m., it was there. I secured the lock. I walked away. When Davis called me back at 7:45 to check the log against the missing item, I opened the vault again. The coat was there. But..." Elara leaned forward, gripping the phone. "But what, Lina?" But the lining tag felt stiffer. The velvet texture seemed slightly rougher under my fingers when I checked the inside panel. I thought it was the humidity, Elara. I convinced myself I was tired. Seraphina had been demanding. She was stressing everyone. I didn't want to look weak or incompetent. Lina choked back a sob. I signed off on the inventory check, confirming the Empress coat was present and accounted for. If the one I signed off on was the fake, then the real one was gone before 7 p.m. This shifted the timeline dramatically. If the real coat was gone before the 7 p.m. return time, then the sequence was, the real coat was removed earlier by Seraphina's team. A perfect replica was placed in the vault. Elara was lured near the vault area between 7:05 and 7:15 p.m., perhaps being told she needed to pick up the cigarette holder immediately. The replica was stolen from the vault, implicating Elara. The real coat was then returned later, perhaps by someone with override clearance, to ensure the police investigation focused on the missing item that was supposedly taken from Elara's trailer. Wait, that didn't quite fit. If the replica was stolen at 7:15 p.m., why was the real coat later planted in Elara's trailer? Elara replayed Davis's accusation. You realized you couldn't walk out with a $200,000 coat on your person, so you hid it in the only place you thought wouldn't be searched until you could retrieve it later, your own fitting rack. The frame was constructed around the idea that Elara stole the coat and hid it. If the coat found in her trailer was the real one, then the setup was even more brutal. Seraphina's team stole the real coat earlier, planted a fake, and when they realized the fake might be detected, they switched the real coat back into the vault at 7 p.m., perhaps by someone with master access. Then stole the real coat again 5 minutes later, planted it in Elara's trailer and called security. No, that's too complex. Simpler explanation. Seraphina wanted the actual priceless coat to vanish, casting blame on Elara, who would then be ruined financially and professionally. Lena, think about the 7 p.m. return. Who signed it back in? Elara urged. It was Marco, Seraphina's dresser. He had clearance because he was finalizing Seraphina's wardrobe for the next day's shoot. He signed it in, verified it, and the vault was locked. Marco, Seraphina's shadow. Lena, I need one thing from you. I need you to find the original purchase receipt for the Empress coat. Not the insurance papers, the boutique receipt. It should have been filed in the costume department's historical archive, the one that's kept off-site. It will list the exact, unique specifications, including the Verratti lining tag number. If you can get me that file number, I can trace the transaction. Lena was silent for a long time. That archive is locked down tighter than Fort Knox. I can't get near it without raising alarms. Elara, this is getting dangerous. They'll ruin me if I help you. They'll ruin me regardless, Lena. If I go down, everyone associated with me gets tainted. You are the only person who knows the coat was subtly different when you checked it back in. Help me find the receipt, and we can prove the pattern of replacement. If we find a record of Seraphina purchasing an identical coat recently, we prove staging. A heavy sigh crackled over the line. The archive manager is a man named Wallace. He's deeply in debt due to bad gambling habits. He owes Seraphina's production company a favor for burying a prior indiscretion. I can't get to Wallace, but I know his wife works catering on the next production over. Hope, fragile and sharp, pierced the suffocating despair. Lena, thank you. I'll handle Wallace. I need a contact point, a secure email address for you, just in case I find something concrete. They arranged a heavily encrypted temporary contact. As Lena disconnected, Elara felt a tiny surge of adrenaline. She was no longer reacting. She was hunting. She was a supporting player, yes, but she understood the architecture of a scene better than anyone. And right now, she was writing her own script. The motel room suddenly felt less like a prison and more like a clandestine headquarters. Elara spent the next week operating in the shadows of Los Angeles, a ghost of the Hollywood dream. She moved between cheap diners and public libraries, avoiding any location connected to her past life. She had liquidated the small amount of savings she had access to before the studio froze her accounts, enough to cover the burner phone and occasional transit costs. The key was Wallace, the archive manager. Lena's information suggested Wallace was beholden to the studio. Direct confrontation was impossible. He would report her instantly. She needed leverage, not a fight. Elara remembered Seraphina Vale's obsession with authenticity, her public pronouncements on the importance of true artistry. Seraphina often used her wealth to acquire vintage or bespoke items, flaunting them as proof of her superior taste. If she had commissioned a perfect replica of the Empress coat, a coat so specific only a handful existed in the world, it wasn't for a stunt double. It was for her. A decoy. Why? If she wanted the real coat to disappear, she would simply keep it. This led Elara back to the initial assumption, the one she had dismissed in her panic. The original Empress coat was the one planted in her trailer. If the real coat was planted, Seraphina wanted the world to believe Elara stole it. But why would Seraphina then report the loss so quickly? Because she wanted the investigation swift, definitive, and focused solely on Elara. Elara reviewed the facts Lena provided. The real coat had a unique Verratti lining tag, Lena noticed the texture change when checking the coat back in at 7 p.m. Marco signed it in. If the coat Lena checked in at 7 p.m. was the replica, and the coat found in Elara's trailer was the real one, then the swap sequence had to be A. Real coat, RC, taken out before 7 p.m., perhaps by Marco or Seraphina. B. Replica coat, RPL, placed in the vault. C. Elara is framed/lured near the vault, 7:05 to 7:15 p.m. D. Security is alerted about the theft. RPL disappears. Elara is identified as the last person near the empty vault. E. The real coat is planted in Elara's trailer after the initial lockdown, perhaps during the chaos when security was supposedly responding to the 7:18 p.m. power fluctuation. This meant Seraphina needed the real coat to disappear permanently after Elara was implicated. The theft allegation was the distraction. The disappearance of the real coat was the goal. But why leave the real coat in Elara's trailer at all? The only logical reason for the real coat to be in her trailer when the police arrived was if someone deliberately placed it there after the initial alarm, knowing the subsequent, more thorough search would turn up the genuine, irreplaceable article, making Elara look not just like a thief, but a spectacularly brazen one who couldn't even manage to hide her prize. It meant the replica coat was the one that went missing initially. Elara shuddered. The sheer audacity of this layered deception was breathtaking. Seraphina hadn't just wanted Elara fired. She wanted her imprisoned, or at the very least, destroyed by financial ruin from an insurance fraud charge tied to the missing replica. The only way to prove this intricate ballet of substitution was the receipt. A receipt for the replica coat would prove Seraphina ordered a duplicate. Elara found Wallace, the archive manager, the only way she could, through his wife's catering business Instagram account. He was pictured at a corporate event, looking harried, standing near a tray of tiny quiches. He had a distinct nervous tic, a habit of rubbing his left thumb against his index finger. She approached him outside a nondescript accounting office downtown, where he was picking up lunch. "Mr. Wallace?" He flinched, the thumb-rubbing motion starting instantly. "Do I know you?" Elara offered a faint, apologetic smile. She wore plain clothes, glasses, and a baseball cap, the perfect uniform of anonymity. "No, sir, but I know your wife. She does wonderful work. I hear the Crimson Requiem set had some issues with their historical costume documentation. Big trouble, I hear." Wallace's eyes darted nervously toward the street. "I don't know what you're talking about. I handle tax documents. Costumes are Lena Rodriguez's domain." "Ah, Lena," Elara said casually. "A true artist. But you know how these stars are. Seraphina Vale, for instance. She's so dedicated to authenticity, isn't she? Always insisting on bespoke fittings, even for items that will never see the light of day." Elara leaned in slightly, letting the threat hang in the dry air. "I'm looking for documentation on a specific purchase. An Italian velvet coat, sable trim. Verratti artisan signature on the lining. It was purchased for Crimson Requiem earlier this year. I believe the invoice was routed through your department for tax purposes because it was a specialty acquisition." Wallace went utterly still. The twitch stopped. That would be under the main production purchase order. It's sealed." "Of course it is," Elara agreed smoothly. "But you know how these things get audited. If the original invoice for an item declared lost or damaged doesn't match the insurance valuation, the whole production gets flagged, especially if one party claims they never received the item they signed for." She didn't mention the replica. She let him fill in that blank himself, hoping his desperation to protect Seraphina's secret, or perhaps Seraphina's discreet instruction to protect the secret, would lead him to cover the track. "It's filed under PPO 99B, Wallace whispered, sweat beading on his forehead. "I can't give you a copy, but I can tell you what the invoice specified if you need to verify something." "Verification is key," Elara said, pulling out her notebook. Not the one with sketches, but a clean one. What were the specs? Wallace recited them rapidly, like reciting a prayer he wished to forget. Midnight blue, grade A velvet. Sable trim, Russian origin. Silk lining. Verratti tagged confirmed. Total cost, $211,500. Paid via a discretionary holding account managed by Mr. Sterling's chief financial officer. Elara scribbled the details. They matched exactly what she knew about the real coat. And the invoice number, Mr. Wallace? He hesitated, licking his lips. I can't give you the number, but there was an addendum order placed 3 weeks ago for a secondary piece, a duplication order. It was marked as a stunt double contingency. It was paid for separately, cash advance, and was not routed through the main archival process. It went straight to costume services. Elara felt a triumphant jolt. A duplication order. The replica. Do you recall the cost of the duplicate, Mr. Wallace? It was almost as much. These replicas are precise. It included the cost of replicating the Verratti signature. They had to forge the tag details, which is why it was handled off-book. A staggering amount for a decoy, proving Seraphina's commitment to the deception. Thank you, Wallace. You've been extremely helpful in preventing an audit disaster. As Elara walked away, Wallace gripped her arm one last time, his grip surprisingly strong. You need to forget you ever talked to me. If Seraphina finds out I even mentioned that duplicate order, I'm finished. Worse than finished. She owns my debts. I understand, Elara said, but she knew Wallace had just inadvertently given her the weapon she needed. The studio had declared the real coat stolen, hoping to collect the massive insurance payout while simultaneously framing Elara for its theft. But if the replica was documented separately, and the real coat was the one recovered in her trailer, the entire insurance claim was fraudulent, and Seraphina was central to it. The question remained, who engineered the switch of the real coat into Elara's trailer? She needed to talk to Marco, Seraphina's dresser. Marco was paid to be invisible, but invisibility often meant seeing everything. Marco was a creature of habit, known for his obsessive organizational skills and his complete lack of independent thought when Seraphina was involved. He was stationed near the star's lavish, permanently assigned dressing room trailers, like a sentry guarding a priceless jewel. Elara knew she couldn't approach him directly. He was too deeply entrenched in Seraphina's employ. She needed to create a scenario where Marco would be forced to interact with her, away from Seraphina's immediate view, and where he might let slip a detail about the coat's handling. She remembered the chaotic aftermath of the initial incident. While the security detail focused on her trailer, the actual filming was paused, leaving the crew milling about. Seraphina, ever the professional martyr, had insisted on doing a quick scene reset in her trailer to maintain momentum, taking only her essential items, and perhaps the replica coat which she intended to lose in the chaos. Elara decided to use Lena's established ally status. She contacted Lena again, not asking for more archive digging, but asking for a simple, plausible favor only a struggling actress could ask for. Help securing a single, specific vintage earring for a different unrelated audition she was supposedly preparing for, an earring she claimed was crucial to nailing the period look. Lena, despite her fear, agreed to meet Elara briefly near the studio commissary parking lot late one evening. I can't stay long, Elara. I'm watching Marco constantly. He's terrified of Seraphina. I just need you to get him to the edge of the lot, Lena. Tell him you noticed a snag on Seraphina's main travel cape. Something only he would have the authority to check immediately. I'll be waiting by the utility gate, pretending to clean out my old storage locker. It was a flimsy plan, relying on Marco's inherent anxiety about Seraphina's wardrobe. 20 minutes later, under the sickly yellow glare of a perimeter light, Lena steered Marco toward the gate area. Marco, dressed impeccably even off hours, looked deeply uncomfortable. It's the left shoulder seam, Marco. It looks frayed, Lena called out, pointing vaguely. As Marco approached the gate, adjusting his jacket, Elara stepped out of the shadows, looking small and defeated, holding a battered cardboard box. Marco, she said softly. He froze, recognizing her instantly. His eyes widened in sheer horror, not at her, but at the implication of being seen near her. Miss Vance, he stammered, taking an involuntary step back toward Lena. I just needed to retrieve this box of personal items they missed, Elara lied, gesturing to the box. I won't take up your time. I just wanted to ask you one quick question, Marco. It's about the Empress coat. Marco looked like he might vomit. I don't know anything about the coat, Miss Vance. I never touched it. I know you signed the return log at 7 p.m. You verified it was in the vault. Thank you for that. But after that, when security came to check the item after the alarm went off, did you see anything unusual about the way it was draped? Any creases? Any sign that it had been handled roughly by an inexperienced person? Marco swallowed hard. Lena was watching him, her face a portrait of strained neutrality. He clearly wanted to flee, but Seraphina's control over him was absolute. No, Marco whispered, his voice catching. It was perfect. Too perfect, maybe. When I signed it in, it was draped exactly the way Ms. Vale prefers. Shoulders slightly forward, protecting the velvet pile. When I checked it later, after the initial lockdown, it was flatter, like it had been pressed against something. Pressed against something? Elara pressed, her heart pounding. Yes, when I returned at 7:45 p.m., I went in immediately. I saw the spot where the replica had been taken. When I saw the real coat back in its place, I was confused. I thought I had made the mistake, that I had put the replica in and pulled the real one out by accident earlier. But when I touched it, Marco trailed off, trembling. What did you feel, Marco? The weight was wrong. The real Empress coat is heavy, substantial. The one I saw at 7:45 p.m. felt lighter. Felt like the padding had been removed. It was the shape of the real coat, but lighter. I thought I was going insane. Elara understood immediately. The swap had happened twice. Real coat, RC, taken out early. Replica, RPL, put in. At 7 p.m., Marco signs in the replica, RPL, believing it to be the RC, because that's what Seraphina's team told him to expect. At 7:15 p.m., the RPL is stolen, framing Elara. During the ensuing chaos, power fluctuation, the real coat, RC, is introduced into the system, placed in Elara's trailer, making her look like she tried to flee with the prize. But Marco's testimony suggested a third phase. If the coat he signed in at 7 p.m. was the RPL, and he found the real coat lighter when he checked it back at 7:45 p.m. after the staged theft, it meant the real coat, RC, was taken from Elara's trailer after the initial alarm and replaced with an even more imperfect duplicate or a heavily modified version of the original replica, RPL+, designed to look convincingly like the RC, but lighter, before security performed the final sweep confirming the loss. This explained why the coat found in her trailer was the real one. It was the final, damning piece of evidence planted by Seraphina's agents, after they had already accused Elara of stealing the missing replica. Marco, Elara said gently, seeing the genuine distress in his eyes. Who told you to check the coat again at 7:45 p.m.? Seraphina. She called my personal cell from her dressing room. She said she had a terrible premonition and insisted I check the vault one last time before the police sealed everything. She told me, if the coat is there, Marco, you bring it directly to me. Do not let security log it again. I need to ensure its integrity. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Seraphina had used the chaos to recover the real coat from Elara's trailer, check it for flaws, and then pretend to secure it, allowing the official narrative to solidify. Elara stole the coat, panicked, and ditched it somewhere unknown, the missing replica. But by having Marco retrieve the real coat at 7:45 p.m., Seraphina ensured the real coat was safely out of the system and in her possession, while Elara faced the insurance fraud investigation regarding the missing coat. But wait, the premise of the entire setup was that the coat was found in Elara's trailer. Elara reviewed the initial police report summary she managed to skim before it was redacted. Suspect Elara Vance was found in possession of the stolen Empress coat, concealed beneath spare costuming materials in her private dressing area. The conflict remained. If Seraphina retrieved the real coat at 7:45 p.m., why was it later found in Elara's trailer? Unless the coat that was supposed to be found in Elara's trailer was the replica. But Marco messed up the timing, and the real coat ended up there instead, forcing Seraphina to improvise. Or, far more likely, the coat found in her trailer was the real coat, but the timeline was manipulated. Elara realized she had been focusing too much on the theft timeline and not enough on the receipt timeline. Wallace confirmed the existence of a high-value replica purchased off-book. That replica was the one that was allegedly stolen first. If the replica was stolen first, and the real coat was then planted, the goal was not insurance fraud on the replica. The goal was career destruction using the real item. Marco, when you checked the coat at 7:45 p.m., and you saw it was lighter, did you notice anything else missing? A tiny piece of thread? A specific ornament? Marco frowned, thinking deeply, his face a study in conflicted loyalty. The sable around the collar felt uneven. I thought it was just rumpled, but I noticed something near the inside lining pocket. A small tear. I didn't report it because Ms. Vale told me to bring it straight to her. And where did you take it? To her private dressing room. She took it from me. She was alone. She looked at the tear for a long time. Then she took a tiny spool of silver thread from her personal sewing kit. A thread I'd never seen before, and she started sewing very quickly over the spot. The silver thread, the marker Elara had noticed, was missing from the coat currently held in evidence. "Thank you, Marco," Elara breathed. "You need to leave now. Go back to your duties. You never spoke to me." As Marco scurried away, looking immensely relieved, Elara felt a profound surge of certainty. Seraphina Vale had swapped the real coat for the replica, framed Elara for stealing the replica, and then, realizing the replica might be flagged by forensic analysis, she had the real coat sewn back together to look perfect, just before planting it on Elara's rack to ensure the final, damning evidence was found during the secondary search. The motive wasn't just malice. It was calculated control over property and reputation. She wanted the insurance money on the stolen replica, and she wanted Elara ruined for stealing the irreplaceable original. Elara had the weapon, proof of the duplicate purchase, Wallace, and proof of the alteration of the real coat, Marco. But she still lacked the one thing that tied Seraphina directly to the purchase of the $185,000 replica. The invoice itself, which Wallace couldn't provide. She needed Lena to get that invoice from the offsite archive. It was time to push her friend past the point of no return. The reality of what Elara was asking Lena to do was staggering. Breaking into a high-security, off-site studio archive, even with Wallace's inside information, was a felony, an act that would guarantee Lena's career, and possibly her freedom would vanish. Elara met Lena the next morning at a bustling farmer's market in Santa Monica, far from the studio's gaze. Lena looked haggard, clutching a tote bag filled with organic vegetables as if it were a shield. "I can't do it, Elara. I looked at the archive schedule. Wallace has two-factor authentication, and the temperature sensors are linked directly to studio security headquarters. If I trigger a remote inquiry, they'll have me in cuffs before I reach the freeway." "You don't have to break in, Lena," Elara countered, keeping her voice low and urgent. "Wallace told me the duplicate order was paid through a discretionary advance, not the main budget. It means the receipt isn't in the permanent costume binder. It's in the financial audit file for that specific quarter." Wallace said it was handled by his senior assistant, Janice. Janice is fanatically loyal to the studio accounting department. She never leaves her desk. Exactly. She's predictable. You know the studio's internal communications system, Lena. You have access to the costume department's shared drives, right? You can access things Janice uploads for her records. Lena's eyes widened in understanding. She uses a shared, temporary folder to transfer preliminary documentation before it's physically filed. It's usually wiped after 48 hours, but if she uploaded the duplicate invoice recently, it might still be there. "Can you access it without leaving a digital trace?" Lena hesitated, looking around at the families enjoying the morning sun. The contrast between this easy normalcy and her own impending criminal decision was stark. "I can try. I know the protocol for backing up costume data. I can initiate a system integrity check on Janice's temporary drive, which effectively downloads everything onto my local terminal for analysis. I'd have about an hour before the system flags the high data load and locks me out. An hour is all I need. Send me the file transfer confirmation code. I'll monitor Janice's terminal activity using a publicly available corporate tracking app One Found. It's slow, but it will tell us if she steps away from her desk. Lena nodded grimly, making the decision. If I do this, Elara, I'm burning my career to the ground for you. You better find something undeniable. I will, Lena. And when I do, I won't just clear my name. I will make sure that integrity means something again in this business. They parted ways, and Elara retreated to a nondescript coffee shop overlooking the Hollywood Hills. For the next 6 hours, she lived inside a flickering screen. She tracked Janice's logged-in status, watched her take calls, and saw the telltale brief pauses in keyboard activity that indicated a file transfer was in progress. At 3:17 p.m., the confirmation code flashed on Elara's screen. Lena had done it. Elara downloaded the massive compressed file onto an encrypted drive, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped the tablet. She bypassed the financial documents entirely, searching the folder structure until she found the directory labeled CR_special_acquisitions_Q2. There it was, invoice_dup_VLT_0718. PDF. Elara opened it. The document was a masterwork of forgery, but the key wasn't the design, it was the digital watermark and the approval chain. The invoice clearly detailed the $185,000 charge for the replica coat. The specifications matched Wallace's recitation perfectly, but the approval chain told the real story. The invoice was authorized not just by the CFO, but by a secondary approval signature, S.V. Personal contingency. Seraphina Vale had personally signed off on the expenditure for the replica, knowing it was intended to be the sacrificial lamb in a frame job against a co-star. But the clincher was the timing. The invoice was approved 3 weeks ago, but the associated transaction log showed the payment was electronically released yesterday, for hours before the coat was allegedly stolen. The studio believed the replica was gone. Seraphina had the real coat, the insurance money pending on the replica, and Elara was taking the fall for the theft of the genuine article. Elara stared at the screen, the culmination of weeks of agonizing fear replaced by cold, hard fury. This wasn't just professional jealousy. It was organized financial sabotage cloaked in pettiness. She immediately encrypted the file, renamed it cryptically, and sent Lena a single-word message. Got it. Then she sent another message to an email address she hadn't used in years, the address of a former film studies professor turned investigative entertainment journalist, Cassandra Reyes, a woman known for her ruthless pursuit of studio corruption. Cassandra, I have proof of insurance fraud and career assassination involving Seraphina Vale and the Empress coat. I need protection and a venue. I am ready to talk. Eve. She knew this was the last step. Once Reyes was involved, the situation would explode into the public sphere, rendering the studio's internal silence obsolete. Elara now had the motive, the mechanism, the replica swap, and the direct authorization for the decoy, the receipt. But she still needed the final, undeniable piece. The link between Seraphina and the planting of the real coat in her trailer after Marco confirmed its lightness at 7:45 p.m. She thought back to Marco's description. Seraphina used a personal sewing kit and a new silver thread to mend the collar tear. That thread, the tiny, almost invisible hallmark of the true Empress coat, had to be somewhere. If Seraphina had planted the coat, she would have done it herself, or used a trusted operative, likely immediately after Marco left her trailer at perhaps 7:55 p.m., before the police secured the area entirely. Elara needed access to Seraphina's trailer, the Star's Sanctuary. She called Mr. Davis, the head of security, on the burner phone, adopting a tone of meek compliance. Mr. Davis, I'm ready to pack up my few remaining things. I need to go to my trailer one last time, just to supervise the handover of my personal property. I won't speak to anyone. I just need that closure. Davis grumbled but agreed, perhaps thinking Elara was finally broken and compliant. He assigned a lone guard, a young man named Tony, who looked bored, to escort her to the now barricaded wardrobe trailer. Elara walked into her trailer, the scene of the crime, feeling utterly detached. She gathered the few remaining items, deliberately letting Tony watch her. Then she made her move. "Tony," she said, pointing toward the far corner of the trailer, where a set of high-end lighting equipment was stored pending relocation. "I think they missed my small makeup light. It's expensive. Can you just check behind that stand? I don't want to be charged for lost equipment." As Tony reluctantly moved toward the corner, Elara moved with practiced swiftness. She didn't go to the door. She went to the wall dividing her trailer from the adjacent empty one, a cheap partition paneling used for quick-set construction. She knew the structure was thin. She pulled a discarded metal ruler from her box of props and jammed it into the seam where the paneling met the floor. With a sharp, tearing sound that masked the small, precise crack she made in the drywall, she managed to pry loose a small 4-inch section of the paneling near the floor, just large enough to slide a hand through. She didn't reach through. She just knelt there, feigning exhaustion, waiting for Tony to report back. "Nothing there, Miss Vance. Just dust." "Thank you, Tony. I'm done now." As they walked back toward the exit gate, Elara felt the familiar pressure of isolation returning. She was relying on Lena's digital infiltration and Cassandra Reyes's willingness to run the story. She had done everything she could from the outside. Now she had to wait for the storm she had summoned to break. But before she left the lot for good, she sent one final, highly specific text message to Lena, using a code word they had agreed upon for the absolute end stage. "Check Seraphina's silver trunk. Verify lining integrity." The silver trunk was Seraphina's personal, road-worn steamer trunk, always kept locked in her main trailer. It was where she kept her most cherished off-screen luxuries, and potentially the spool of silver thread used to finish the job. The storm broke not on the studio lot, but in the gilded, overly curated halls of the Hollywood Foreign Press Association's annual pre-award luncheon, held at the Beverly Hilton 2 days later. Elara Vance, invited at the insistence of Cassandra Reyes, who leveraged a major exclusive deal on the condition Elara appear publicly, walked in looking nothing like the broken woman Davis had escorted out. She wore a simple, perfectly tailored charcoal suit, her hair pulled back severely. She wasn't wearing borrowed jewelry or trying to look like a star. She was wearing the uniform of someone who demanded respect based on merit, not pretense. Seraphina Vale arrived precisely 10 minutes late, gliding into the ballroom in a shimmering gown, instantly sucking all available oxygen and attention toward her. She spotted Elara across the room. Seraphina's smile, usually blinding, didn't reach her eyes. She mouthed something, amateur, before turning her attention to a waiting producer. The presentation began smoothly. Speeches about artistry, craft, and the magic of cinema. Then, Cassandra Reyes, seated at the main table, tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reyes said, her voice ringing with journalistic authority. "Before we move to the Lifetime Achievement Award, I need to address a matter of recent industry conduct that touches upon the very definition of integrity we've been discussing today." The room fell silent. Seraphina, seated at the head table, straightened her posture, radiating defensive confidence. She knew where this was going but believed she had constructed an impenetrable fortress of lies. Reyes didn't waste time. She projected a high-resolution image onto the large screen behind her. It was the digital receipt Wallace had managed to confirm and Reyes's team had cross-referenced with the studio's preliminary audit data. "This is invoice DP 4492, approved 3 weeks ago. It details the acquisition of a specialty item for the film Crimson Requiem, a duplicate Empress coat valued at $185,000, signed off personally by Seraphina Vale under her private contingency fund." A ripple of shock went through the room. Seraphina paled slightly, but her veneer held. A contingency piece, standard practice for high-value action sequences. She stated coolly into the microphone closest to her. "I'm unclear how this pertains to Miss Vance's inability to safeguard the original." "It pertains, Ms. Vale," Cassandra countered, "because the coat recovered from Miss Vance's trailer, the one she is accused of stealing, was later confirmed by forensic analysis, and by the testimony of the head costumer, Lena Rodriguez, to be the real Empress coat, distinguished by the unique Verratti signature thread on the inner lining." Gasps erupted. Seraphina blinked, her composure finally fracturing. The accusation against Miss Vance was that she stole a $200,000 coat. However, the piece initially reported missing by your team, the one that allowed the investigation to focus on the 15-minute window, was the $185,000 replica. A replica that Ms. Vale personally authorized and paid for. Reyes paused, letting the implications sink in. Seraphina was attempting to commit insurance fraud on the replica while simultaneously ruining Elara's life by framing her for stealing the original. But the frame required the real coat to be recovered from Elara to make the accusation stick. Reyes continued, her voice hardening. And that is where the true crime lies. Elara Vance was framed twice. Reyes then projected a second image. A blurred, grainy still taken from a low-angle security camera feed near the Star's trailer area. Timestamped 7:58 p.m., 2 minutes after Marco had left Seraphina's trailer. The figure in the image, cloaked by shadow but recognizably tall and slender, was seen quickly depositing a large, draped object into the vicinity of Elara's trailer before retreating. This image was taken just after Marco, Ms. Vale's dresser, confirmed retrieving the real coat from the vault area, claiming it was damaged and needed immediate repair by Ms. Vale herself. Elara rose slowly, walking toward the main dais, ignoring the flurry of flashing cameras. She looked directly at Seraphina. You wanted me gone, Seraphina. You couldn't tolerate anyone else having even a moment of genuine audience focus. You planned to destroy me financially by alleging I stole the original, and then you planned to escape liability by reporting the replica missing for an insurance payout. It was airtight until you got greedy, and until you realized the replica wouldn't pass muster. Seraphina finally stood up, her face a mask of furious disbelief, attempting to seize back the narrative. This is slander. This woman is clearly unstable. I told you, I was repairing my own coat. I used my own sewing kit, the one I carry everywhere, to maintain its perfection, and I paid for the replica as a safety net. There is no crime here, only poor handling by a disgruntled extra. Is that right? Elara asked softly, pulling a small, sealed evidence bag from her own designer handbag. Inside the bag was a tiny, shimmering object. Marco confirmed you used a spool of new silver thread to mend the tear you made when you removed the coat from my trailer after 7:45 p.m. A thread you kept in your personal silver trunk, as Lena described it. Elara walked to the head table, her composure absolute, and held up the bag for the room to see. This is the original Verratti signature thread I found caught in the lining of the trunk when Lena, who is now testifying independently, was allowed access this morning. It is chemically identical to the thread used to finish the Empress coat, a thread you never use in any other garment. She dropped the bag onto the table in front of Seraphina. The tiny silver strand lay there, damning and infinitesimal. You framed me for theft, Seraphina. You attempted insurance fraud. And you corrupted studio staff to execute a meticulously planned, multi-layered conspiracy. All because you feared a supporting actress might have a moment of honest connection with the audience. The silence this time was total, broken only by the frantic clicking of cameras. Seraphina looked down at the thread, then up at Elara, and for the first time, Elara saw not the Ice Queen of Hollywood, but a petty, terrified woman trapped by her own excesses. The power had vanished, leaving only the brittle vanity behind. Richard Sterling, the studio head, who had been watching the entire scene unfold from the side, finally approached the microphone, his face ashen. The scandal was now public, massive, and involved fraud, framing, and the deliberate destruction of a contract player. The studio, Sterling announced, his voice thick with damage control, is cooperating fully with the authorities regarding the allegations of insurance fraud and obstruction of justice. Miss Vance, your suspension is immediately lifted. Your contract will not only be honored, but renegotiated to reflect the egregious misconduct you have endured. We apologize unreservedly for the catastrophic failure of our internal oversight. Seraphina Vale didn't wait for the police or the studio executives. She rose, knocking her water glass over, the crystal shattering on the marble floor, a sharp sound that echoed the breaking of her rain. Without a word, she swept past Elara, her shimmering gown momentarily brushing Elara's tailored shoulder, and fled the luncheon, disappearing into the waiting press corps chaos outside. Elara stood there, not basking in the attention, but feeling a profound, exhausting relief. She looked at Cassandra Reyes, who offered a small, respectful nod. "You didn't just survive, Elara," Reyes murmured. "You dismantled the machine that tried to crush you." Elara looked around the ballroom. The noise had returned, but now it was different. It was an acknowledgement of truth, not manufactured hype. She thought of the cramped motel room, the fear, the moments she almost gave up. She had fought not for the spotlight, but for the simple right to work without being consumed by the shadows of those who already stood in it. Walking away from the dais, past the whispered apologies and the sudden, desperate requests for interviews, Elara felt the weight lift. The Empress coat, the symbol of superficial power, was gone from her life, replaced by something far more valuable. The knowledge that even in a rigged game, tenacity and truth could forge a victory that no $150 million production could ever manufacture. Justice, she realized, wasn't always loud or swift. Sometimes, it was just the quiet, meticulous proof found on a dusty receipt, held together by the sheer, unyielding will of the overlooked. Her career was hers again, earned not by luck, but by the fight she had waged alone in the dark.